welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, my name's Martin and the channel's all about life after retirement, what sort of things I can get up to and what sort of adventures there might be. Now, this is the 7th in my Wicken Fen playlist and it represents the second which describes the management of Wicken Fen. So I hope you enjoy it. Okay then, here we go. So here we are out on Adventurers Fen, and we've come to look at some of the more unique ways that we manage this part of the nature reserve. It has a very different feel to the undrained fen. It has a very different set of criteria under which we manage it to the undrained fen. And in effect, in very simple terms, we are trying to re-establish a set of natural processes that would have been quite common in the British countryside up until, or at least in the fens anyway, up until the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries. That's when drainage started to take effect, and that's when a lot of those natural processes were lost. Now, what are those processes? Well, in reality, it's actually quite simple, or it sounds quite simple. It's about re-establishing a natural or naturalistic hydrological regime. So in other words, letting the water do what the water wants to do rather than draining it all away. And it's about allowing the vegetation to regenerate naturally. So that means whatever seed bank is in the soil grows, and we don't try and manipulate it, we don't try and control it, we just allow it to do its own thing. And within that, we have a set of principles where we try and allow the natural influences on vegetation. Now, in the British countryside, we no longer have large herbivores, or at least grazing herbivores. We have deer, but we don't have cattle, we don't have horses. There are a few wild boar around now, but the big influences were the grazing animals. And those have been lost. The last grazing, truly wild grazing cattle in the UK was a couple of, nearly 1,000 years ago with the aurochs. They've gone and there isn't anything else. So we've had to introduce animals to actually fill in the gaps, if you like, to have that influence on the vegetation, to allow them to determine what the vegetation is going to do, and not have humans tinkering and interfering. So all of this makes it quite an unknown or unpredictable, shall we say, outcome. It's dynamic. It allows for mosaics of vegetation to become established within the seed bank that exists within the soil, and not something that we try and manipulate. Just get across the ditch there. In effect, it is dynamic, and in effect, it's open-ended. There is no end point to it. It's continually changing. It's continually on the move, and it's very interesting. And the outcomes can sometimes be very, very surprising. Now, when I say we've had to rebuild, if you like, the sort of naturalistic grazing, we've done that by introducing large herbivores. And by large herbivores, I mean we introduced hardy cattle and we introduced self-reliant equines, horses, ponies. And today we're going to speak with one of my colleagues, Carol Laidlaw. She's the person that manages the herds, or manages the condition of the herds. And I'll let her describe what she does, how she does it, and what those outcomes are. Right, so this is Carol Laidlaw. Carol Laidlaw's my colleague that looks after the management of the grazing herds. So, in your words, Carol, what is your role? How would you describe it?
I've got the day-to-day responsibility for the welfare and care of these animals, as well as some responsibility for all of the legal sort of things that you need to do with keeping animals, welfare, passports, and also looking at the longer term future of them here. So management of the herds as we go into the future.
What exactly does that mean in terms of managing for the future? What sort of things do you look for?
In terms of managing for the future, population control is a big thing at the moment. We've got 80 horses, 80 Conic Polski on site, and they are the group we've got in shot and are with at the moment are the breeding horses. And this year we got about 20 foals. At the moment we've got a fairly limited area of land, so we can't have that size of population just breeding without having to do some control of that breeding somehow. So one of the things we look at are different methods of contraception and slowing down breeding and changing some of the herd dynamics to kind of mix up the genetics a little bit.
Sounds interesting. You mentioned Conic. They're not the only grazing animals that we've brought back to Wicken, are they?
No, not at all. We've got Highland cattle as well, in a number of groups spread across the reserve. Our first group of Highland cattle came in 2005, a group of 8 females and 1 bull, and they've been slowly breeding ever since. And we've now got nearly 50 on site.
And why Conic? Why Highlands? What's special about them, I suppose? Why did we choose those?
The Conics were chosen because with both species we wanted animals that were robust and tough and hardy and that could live out year round with as minimal human influence as we could allow within current welfare guidelines and within what we wanted to achieve with the vision. Both Conics and Highlands had a proven track record in other reserves, both in Britain and across Europe. There was a historical precedent for Highland cattle being grazed in this area of the county. And as far as the Conics were concerned, there are no local native ponies to the fens. Well, I tell a lie, there was one in the Lincolnshire Fens many years ago, a couple of centuries ago, delightfully called the Wigmore Tit. But that has since become extinct and we don't have it anymore. The only other local one is one called the Suffolk Punch, and that is a big heavy horse. And even back as far as the 1700s, it was noted that it would be far too heavy and weighty for the peat soils of the wetter fens. So the Conics had a good track record. Although they are left unhandled, they are curious.
As we can
see. And they are remarkably placid. Even in stressful situations, they tend not to get viciously angry about it, but rather quietly and politely stubborn. Trying to get a Conic to do something that it doesn't want to do is really a lesson in extreme patience and subtlety as well. So for all of those reasons, because we've got public access, we wanted animals that were good around people, even of temperament, really hardy, really tough, and that could adapt to a free living lifestyle.
Right. So there are cattle and there are horses, and you've explained why we've got these two particular breeds. Why do we graze them together? Why do they? Well, they have the opportunity, although they don't do it all that often, but they have the opportunity to mingle. But they can certainly use the same grazing space. Yeah. So why is that? Why together?
The mixed species grazing is a really good thing because every species has slightly different needs and slightly different ways of moving around, interacting with each other and with the landscape. And these all add layers of complexity and difference to the grazing. So we chose cattle and horses because we felt that the grazing would be complementary to each other. Cattle have got, their mouth structure is different from horses, so that means they graze the vegetation, tear the vegetation in a different way from horses. So you get more tussocky, raggedy areas where cattle have been grazing, whereas where horses have been grazing, it tends to be a lot more even and close cropped. Because of these differences in the mouths and the physical structure of the mouths, horses can select out plants on a plant by plant basis, but cattle can only do it on a metre by metre basis, on a sward basis. So again, that has a different impact, and it's for these differing characteristics that we wanted to graze the two together, because it gives you a really nuanced landscape.
Right. And what have the results been like? What have the benefits been? What sort of things have you noticed compared to, let's say, the days when we used to graze with domesticated cattle, where they'd come on in May and leave in October, and was a sort of set grazing ratio? How does it differ?
I would say they use more of the area, so you're tending to get differing grazing pressures and differing areas across the spread of the year. A lot of the impact they have on the landscape is over the winter, because they're foraging a lot more. They need to take a lot more in to keep themselves going. And I would say there's more variety. There are more little niches opening up for things. So when we have the bulls displaying against each other, they'll often dig their horns into the ground and toss up great clods of earth, creating patches of disturbed earth, which are great for some invertebrates, reptiles to use as sunning patches. It breaks up the seed bank, opens up the seed bank, and all of those little things, I think, have added to having a more varied landscape, but not necessarily on a big scale, on small scale, a mosaic across the whole reserve, which I don't think we saw when we had uniform grazing with the same species, roughly of the same age, at a set period every year.
Yeah, that's interesting. Before we finish, one little thing I've noticed, they've all got very unusual tails and manes. Could you explain what's happened? It looks a bit peculiar.
There's a plant that grows on the fen. It's called the burdock. It's the one that children used to gather up and throw at each other to stick on their clothes. It's kind of a bit like Velcro, and at this time of year there's a lot of it that gets into their manes and tails. It looks really odd. You get some wonderful bonnets going on and fantastic hairstyles. It might be a bit uncomfortable for a few days, but slowly over the course of the autumn and winter, the burdocks work their way out and their manes and tails are back to normal.
A little bit of social activity there.
Somebody feeling a bit flirty?
Yeah. When was your last foal? Have they finished foaling now, do you think?
I think so. We've still got 2 or 3 mares that haven't foaled yet, but there's a chance, I think, by this time of the year they're probably not going to. So overall we had 20 foals, and the last one was about a month and a half ago.
Right. And you know...
Just walking past us there, actually. That little blonde one.
Right, yeah.
Just there.
Yeah. Fantastic. Now, you come down here every day. In fact, you're down here so that you can do the daily check on these, a condition check on these.
Yeah.
In a sort of minute or so, can you explain what that means, what that is?
When I come down to do the daily checks, I'm not just looking for obvious things like injuries and hello girl, injuries and illnesses, but I'm looking for changes in behaviour that might indicate that something is about to go wrong, changes in family group structure. So if we've got the youngsters moving out from their family group to a different group, or youngsters moving into a different family group.
We're definitely on the move here.
Yeah,
Aren't
yeah, they've had their mid-morning siesta.
we? Hello.
And so I'm looking for lots of little subtleties about who's hanging out with who's grazing next to who, and to make sure that they're all walking okay, that they've got nothing obviously wrong with them.
Excellent. Okay, just as a little aside for people, I don't think we can see on this one, but I did notice one or two with bird droppings on their backs. We've probably all seen images of oxpeckers and that on the backs of zebra and giraffe in Africa. We get the same here at Wicken Fen with starlings and conic ponies. There's no difference. They use the conics as a perch where they can look for insects in the ground, and of course the horses, as they walk around, they disturb the insects. So it's a bit unfortunate that they have a crap in the middle of their back, but that's the price you pay, I suppose. But yeah, it's like Africa in with a different climate. Okay, Carol, well, thanks very much for that. I'm sure that as the years go by, this project it's such a fantastic project, and it is going to grow. And you must be really excited by it all.
I am, yeah. I'm really excited by how the behaviour of the herds is changing and developing as they learn about the landscape that they're in and start to utilise it and move around. And seeing, particularly with the horses, because having a breeding herd of horses like this in lowland Britain is really quite unusual. So seeing effectively wild horse behaviour in a free living herd in this area of Britain is pretty amazing.
That's fantastic. Well, good luck with it all, and
Thank you.
I will in retirement keep a very close eye on what's going on. I'm obviously invested in it quite a lot, but I'm curious as to which way, or as to how it's going to go. So thanks very much and good luck.
Thank you.
Now, one of the things, or one or two things to bear in mind if you visit Wicken, and it's well worth a visit, are to do with the grazing animals. You need to bear in mind these are not your average run-of-the-mill grazing types. They're not used to being handled, or they don't get handled. They're not fed. They don't see human beings as a source of food, or they don't see us as a threat. Often they treat us either with curiosity or with indifference. So for instance, if you encounter something on a footpath, it's not likely to move out of your way. You know, you'll have to go around it. But more importantly, it's not a good idea to approach these animals. They are expressing their own life. They're expressing they're carrying on their life in their way. They do take exception to each other sometimes. They can chase each other sometimes, and you don't want to get in the way of that. So be aware of where the animals are. Make sure you're aware of what's going on and what they're doing, and you'll find it very interesting just watching their sort of social behaviours, because it's not something you see in very many places, and it's well worth sort of standing and observing. Just don't get in their way, basically. And please, 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 whatever you do, don't try and feed them. Some people that have got horses or know horses really well, well, these aren't normal average run-of-the-mill horses. These are different, and they're also behaving very differently. They're in a herd structure. They like being in herds, so they're herd animals. They like the social structure, but that comes along with disagreements. They get fed up with each other, and they will take exception to that. So just bear that in mind, and please don't approach them or try and feed them. Now, what all that really amounts to, I suppose, is how this type of management, this type of different management in lowland Britain can have an impact on the way landscapes and habitats will develop. We have never stood out and said that this is the only way to do it. It's just a different way to do it. It brings slightly different results. It makes the land more flexible, it makes it dynamic, therefore it makes it or allows it the flexibility to change with the changing conditions. Now really that's all there is time for on this one, so I'm going to draw a line now and say that I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, then think about subscribing. It all helps. If you've got any comments, please leave some comments down below. And if you want to see some more, either of the Wicken playlist or of my retirement vlogs, then ding the old bell. And if you have enjoyed any of it, then give us a bit of a thumbs up. Okay then, cheerio.